Hey everyone, welcome to the KE Report in another daily editorial. This time chatting with Matt Badiali. Matt is the editor of the New Energy Investor, which is published under the Mangrove Investor brand. As we always do with Matt, we'll talk a little bit more about critical minerals space in terms of what metals are getting attention, some of the recent news out there. The focus in this segment going to very much be around antimony because boy oh boy, I'm hearing a lot of companies now say, look at the antimony we have mostly in our gold projects. It seems like antimony is pretty prevalent in a lot of gold assets. And now with China's move, because most of the supply of antimony comes from China, China says they're keeping it all. So the price has spiked, and antimony is used in the defense system in terms of bullets and a lot of other uses, again, in the defense area. So, hey, rightfully so. A lot of companies out there are saying, we have antimony. It's a critical mineral. It could help us with government relations. It could also free up some government money. Who knows if this is all going to come to pass? But fact of the matter is, antimony is what seems like a new hot commodity out there. So, Matt, what's your background in antimony? Any insights you can give us in the broad antimony market?
It's one of those metals that kind of flew under the radar for years. Way back in the day, I was exploring Nevada, trying to understand the landscape out there. And I was there with a junior gold exploration company. And the project we were going to go look at was notable because they had pits where the old timers had mined antimony. But we really don't do much with it in the States anymore. In fact, we get less than 20% of our antimony from recycling and import everything else. So, yeah, it's not one that I know too much about. I know that it's used in military applications, including, the specialty glasses, it's in ceramics, but it's also in car batteries. And so a lot of the recycled antimony that we have comes out of the old lead acid car batteries.
Well, it's definitely become a firestorm of interest, and it's not just antimony. Everything from germanium to tungsten is that has these Chinese export bans is getting a lift. But antimony seems to be the one that's animated investors the most. If you look at a lot of the companies that have been getting some airtime, I think it really came to head with Perpetua. If people listening in know that Perpetua used to be Midas Gold, it was the gold that they have, millions of ounces, that was of interest, but it's the antimony that helped them get their permit finalized after, I think, over a dozen years. So could it be a boon to the permitting of companies that are gold that have an antimony kicker just from a permitting standpoint?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think you have two things going on in terms of permitting. I mean, you have a new regime, a new president. They have the entire Congress and the judiciary all aligned. And one of the things they're looking for is reshoring these industries, and mining is definitely one of them that they're looking at. And then when you combine that with the fact that China has cut off supplies of a metal that we absolutely need, and we don't currently mine any of it here. Yeah, I think that's a pretty persuasive argument for a company to make, especially if they can economically produce antimony from their deposits. And there are a lot of companies, like you said, that it's not the primary metal. And in fact, a lot of these companies they may have the assays for it, but no one ever built antimony into their economic models before, or very few, I should say.
Yeah, it's so true, but that's why we're hearing more about it. The permitting, man, that could really help these assets. What about on the back of that, the funding, though, Matt? Because I feel like all we're hearing from companies that even have a sniff of critical minerals in their projects is that they're looking for government money. We have seen some governments give some money, or at least in very company friendly terms, provide money to these companies, but it's not as easy as simply saying, I have this metal, the government's going to give me money. So, do you see the whole antimony angle as shoring up more capital for companies?
I'm much more sanguine about that. Government grants for mining is a much larger step than making it easier for companies to get permits on existing projects. And in this, this government is cutting budgets left, right, and center. And this doesn't look to me like something that would happen easily. And the other thing that you have to remember is certainly in the States is that these governments are only here for 2 years. I mean, the president will be there for four, but if he's unpopular or the programs are unpopular, in 2 years, you can change the Congress and everything will change. So no, I'm not, I'm, I'm not going to buy a company because of the potential for them to get a government grant or financial aid from the government. I want to see a lot more of that happening before I will build that into any of my models.
Well, Matt, as we always see, anytime any metal gets a price premium, a lot of juniors rush into it and say, "Hey, me too. We've got antimony too," and they start marketing to it. Are you at all concerned that investors don't seem to learn from past rare earth pops, or when lithium was getting hot, or even uranium? Like, there's a lot of Me Too companies that jump onto the boat and say, "Oh my gosh, we've got antimony. Let's market it." Do you think that is a warning to investors not to get sucked into the flashy stories?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing. I've seen so many people go down this path that I recognize it now as a fundamental part of human nature. I mean, you can go all the way back to the tulip bulb mania. The next big thing draws in lots of investors. And I've seen people fooled left, right, and center. I have a family member that, gosh, I hope she doesn't ever listen to this, but she went hard into Iraqi dinar because someone had convinced her that when Iraq became a stable country and the US was running it, the value of the dinar would soar. So with that perspective, I know people are going to get fooled. I just hope that they have sense enough to dig a little deeper. I mean, in the letter, we recommended the U.S. Antimony Corporation, which is UAMY on the Amex, because it was at the time, this was what, January, it was 183 million market cap. And that was an explosion from where they had been just a couple months earlier. But, if antimony actually really gets rolling, US antimony is in production. So this is a company that has that potential to really see its revenue soar because they're in production. If you're speculating on a moose pasture gold project that's really not much more than some surface samples, but they have antimony in there as well, you're going to pay tuition. It's going to be an expensive one too.
Well, we're undoubtedly going to see some companies update resources and throw in that antimony credit, and it will improve the overall economics of these projects. We'll see again how that all filters down. But Matt, you made an interesting comment that some of the antimony right now is coming from recycling. And that's actually one thing we've heard government say is that some, at least, of this money that they have set aside for critical minerals, they want to focus on more of a recycling component here, using whatever is already above ground and repurposing that. What is the recycling industry like out there? Do you know for antimony?
It's an area that I'm very interested in. I don't know the whole story about the recycling yet, but it's on my list of things to figure out because I like recycling in general. There have been a few companies out there over the years that I've followed and backed because of that business model. It just hasn't really taken off. Like it's usually recycling and other things. But yeah, I mean, when 20% of the metal comes from battery recycling and you can do more of that, they probably will. And especially like we talked about government grants in the past, but that was an area that, the past administration was supporting some grants to recyclers. It would be interesting to see if this administration does that too. I don't have the whole story there yet.
Matt, you keep a pretty good pulse on the metals market, the resource market, particularly as it relates to the critical minerals. Are there any other up and coming minerals like antimony that we can get in front of before the companies go up 300%?
Well, the antimony was just one of several of the companies or of the metals that were banned by China. And China spent the last, wow, geez, 20 years kind of consolidating, not production, although they do produce a lot of antimony, but refining capacity. So a lot of the base metal just gets mined, concentrated, and then the concentrated gets shipped to China, where the refineries take, they produce the all the metals, the primaries and the secondaries. And there aren't as many of them here. And actually, the one that I'm thinking of, the metal is germanium. So, germanium is another one that China has banned. And I went years ago to a refinery. It was a zinc refinery in Tennessee. And germanium was just kind of coming into demand by the tech industry. And these guys they had all their waste from the 60s in ponds. And it turned out that their waste was rich in germanium. So they were going back to reprocess that germanium. And that was a really nice investment for a very short time. And then the company was acquired and they took it private. But so germanium is one I'm looking at. And then gallium is another one I don't know anything about, but I have to learn. And then there are there is still the rare earths that we were joking about earlier. We used to call them hopium, scandium, and storium, but you don't need a lot of them, but they go into everything. And that is another supply that's been banned. So what I'm concerned most about is not only that these things get cut off, but that our alternative supplies other than China are going to be tariffs. So one of the ways to hit back at the tariff regime that the US is slapping on other people is to find the stuff that will really sting the US industry and put tariffs on that, tax the crap out of that. And metals, especially with China leading the way by eliminating or restricting the supply, metals is a very smart thing for other countries to put tariffs on. So, yeah, I need to do more work to identify more of these metals, but also figure out where the heck they're going to come from. And to go back to what Corey said, I think that recycling may be the right place to look, like, to look for new sources.
What about that refining aspect, though? Because you are right. Look, the US just doesn't seem to have much refining capacity. And it doesn't seem like there's a big shift of people saying we're building refineries. Is there something broken with that business model in North America here, Matt? Or why aren't we hearing more about the US building refinery capacity or even public companies saying, look, we're going to move to build a refinery since it is in such demand in the US especially?
Yeah, it comes back to the same old problem. You can do it cheaper in China. There are fewer environmental regulations. The population doesn't really get a say. There's a company near me that's trying to build a bioethanol plant where they take waste product from a mill, from a pulp mill here, the stuff that they would be dumping into the ocean anyway, and they want to use yeast basically to turn it into ethanol. Um, and the people are absolutely outraged. They'd rather apparently see it dumped into the ocean than have an ethanol plant. If you can't, if you can't even build a plant to brew alcohol, nobody wants a metal refining, and actually nobody wants metal refining anyway. I mean, we in the States, we spent the last 20 years dismantling our oil refining industry. All the major refining has really become concentrated in the Gulf Coast, right in the Hurricane Alley area. So I think that it's very, very difficult to permit, to build, and to get local approval to build refining. And again, you can say, well, this new administration coming in now, they seem to be more for it and more for domestic industry. But again, you've got a 2-year window to get stuff done. You can't get a refinery planned, approved, and built in 2 years or 4 years. You just can't. So that's an area that I'm concerned about is if China shuts the door, it's leverage for them. It gives them a much bigger economic stick to wield power on the global stage with. You know what I mean?
So, Matt, what is your thought right now on this whole critical minerals narrative? Because, look, it really seemed to die last year, maybe, and everything seems to be all about China and just how much control China has over these certain minerals. But we hear from companies all the time, oh, well, we have this mineral that's on the critical minerals list, but it doesn't really seem to move the needle until China goes out there and completely cuts off some sort of supply and then prices go up. So when you're looking at companies and this whole critical minerals narrative, are you interested anymore?
Yeah, I am. I absolutely am. But when you say it doesn't move the needle, what you mean is the stock price, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
even funding for companies usually.
Well, yeah, I mean, the market has been, and I think they go hand in hand. We as a group, certainly investors, our time frame of how long we want to be in a position has gotten shorter and shorter. And that has been catered to by the industry. Oh, you want a shorter term chance to make money or lose money? Let's go to options. Oh, wait, you want to even short? Let's go to day trading. Let's go to derivatives. You want instant gratification? Let's go to, gambling on football games. You can bet on anything. So what we see is exactly what you said. Nobody's looking, and then everybody's looking. So what I'm doing right now certainly is I'm getting in and positioning readers ahead of that snapback because it has to come. We don't know when it's going to come. And years ago, Rick Rule used to say, you can be right, but if it took you 5 years at 8%, you might as well have been wrong. So the question is, how long is it going to take for this to show up? And I still think stuff like copper it's going to show up. China has not stopped building electric vehicles. In fact, they're accelerating. So, in the US right now, people aren't really that we're not looking at lithium anymore. We're not looking at copper anymore because the incoming administration doesn't believe in climate change, doesn't believe in electrification, but the rest of the world still does. And the rest of the world matters. China is the mouth of the world when it comes to commodities. And as you saw with antimony, they can dictate what happens to the price of a commodity. So if it's in their best interest for the price of a commodity to go up, it's going up. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm looking at. But yes, I absolutely believe the narrative in critical minerals, and I'm 100% behind it because when like with gold recently, like if you wanted to get a position in gold, you're too late. You should have done it a year ago.
Yeah, we'll see where gold's going. Gold keeps on moving higher, but these gold stocks, there still could be room to run there. But on that whole critical minerals narrative, just seems like the whole title of a critical mineral is great to have, but it then comes down to what China's going to do because then that moves price. And also, if these governments really start giving money to the underlying companies that are out there exploring or trying to develop projects, especially if the government starts funding builds of projects rather than just these economic studies. I think that could really move the needle. But again, we've seen kind of that government money generally be slow and hasn't really moved the needle for some of these companies in terms of fully funding an asset. So we will see, but it just seems like so much attention. Again, it's just on China. China can move the price of these metals and then investors follow. And right now, well, antimony is on a lot of people's radar, and I'm hearing a whole lot about it from a lot of gold companies. So I don't know how rare it is because it seems like a lot of these gold companies have antimony. It's just how they're going to factor it into their economics and if they're already producing, where it goes. Just an interesting topic, Matt. I do appreciate you going down this road with us. We will be chatting again in a few weeks to cover any other news, any other headlines from the critical minerals sector. Again, Matt Badiali, editor of the New Energy Investor, published under the Mangrove Investor. You can click that link in the show notes to visit the Mangrove Investor website. Matt, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, guys.